So welcome. The Iowa City Area Business Partnership has developed a new set of policy priorities, and we are always focused on kind of talking about workforce issues, business related issues, and community development related issues. So I know I sent out some questions or just some topic areas that we were going to cover today. And really appreciate your time spent with us talking about these issues. So with that, I also wanted to just introduce my chair of the Business Council for Legislative Affairs, Chuck Diceback, who's the CEO of South Slope Communications. He's helping me this year as we kind of move through this legislative session. And he has been a wealth of knowledge for me as I've learned about broadband and all of the issues surrounding broadband. So I thought he would be an excellent partner in crime this session as we kind of work through some of those details. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chuck.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, legislators, for joining us today. We know you guys have had a busy week and many busy weeks ahead of you, so thank you again for your service, and appreciate you cutting out some time for us today. I would like to recognize the legislators we do have on the call. Representative Dave Jacoby, Senator Joe Bolcom, Senator Kevin Kinney, Representative Mary Masher. A new one to our list this year is Representative Christina Bohanna. So thank you for joining us. And also Zach Walls, Senator Zach Walls, and congratulations to the new minority leader. So thank you for joining us. Hopefully Representative Amy Nielsen and Representative Bobby Kaufman will be joining us shortly as well. So for all the members that are on the call, we definitely want to hear from you. There's a couple different ways that you can ask questions. First one is if you just like to enter your question in the chat box, and then Jennifer will go ahead and ask that question for you. Or you can simply raise your hand and Jennifer will call on you and we'll open up your mic and let you ask that question. But everybody will be on mute for the remaining part of our discussion here until the end when we can ask some questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I always want to just take a moment and thank our sponsors, IBEW, Local 405, Green State Credit Union. Thank you, Rebecca, for your continued support. And South Slope Communications has sponsored us again this year as well. So thank you, Chuck, for your sponsorship. So as we mentioned earlier, this is your time for our members to ask questions, but legislators, if you have questions of our membership, this is a good time for you too to get feedback if there's things you have questions on. And with that, I thought maybe the first question we could have would be around broadband. So I'm gonna let Chuck get started with that.
Thanks again, Jennifer. Yeah, and the state condition of the state that the governor kicked off here a couple weeks ago, her first topic was broadband funding, access to broadband, equity, urban versus rural, and it's a large dollar amount that she's proposing to the legislators, $450 million over the next 3 years, $150 million a year. The next task is, I'm sure, is how the legislators are going to fund this. So we would like to hear your thoughts on these topics: affordability, funding, equity, and then urban versus rural, and maybe some other issues that you've heard as well. I think I've probably got as many questions to me over the last 2 weeks that you have. So who wants to jump in and tackle that one? Dave, you got a smile on your face, so you must have all kinds of things to say.
Darn it, Chuck, I was just getting ready to walk away. Well, it's interesting, as you well know, that we have a new committee this year too, and that's the IT committee. So it's a standing committee, and I think we've put the right people on it on both the House and Senate side. You mentioned the $400 to $500 million that the governor has suggested. I think the big challenge, especially for you, Chuck, and others on the forum today, is you guys are a lot more smarter than we are when it comes to broadband. not only how much does it cost, number one, how to do it right, how to do it sustainable. And for me, since, I just got rid of my iPhone 1 and now I have an iFlip phone 4, no, 11 or 12, is how do we keep pace with technology so that we don't invest 452 million and then find out in 2 years that's antiquated service. So I'm more interested to hear from you, Chuck, and others on from the chamber and the corridor on what their ideas are.
Well, I'll take a stab at that first, Dave, and thanks for chiming in. Future-proofing the network is what's key. I mean, if you look at in the past where we've gotten federal funds or even some grant funds from the state, a lot of times they're hitting the minimums. So the minimum threshold for broadband today, which is defined by the FCC, is 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up. Well, with the pandemic, as many people that have moved back to working from home, schools that are working online, that's just not enough. So if we're going to target the minimums, by the time this gets rolled out, by the time the funding gets available to us, by the time we're able to get contractors and build this out, that'll be back to like doing dial-up. And that's kind of where we're at with 25 by 3. Now, if there's a customer or anybody on this call that maybe only has access to 3 or 5 meg, they're saying, boy, I'd love to have 25 by 3. But when you're thinking about investing, $500 million into something that all you're looking at is hitting the minimum, we're going to fail. We're going to fail as providers. We're going to fail as leaders for our state. It's going to be a real challenge. So I know the IT group, the IT committee that you mentioned, has also got a lot of leaders across the state that are part of I think the governor's Empower Rural Iowa committee. They are recommending 100 by 100. And that is really where we need to be targeting. So the way to get there is with fixed facilities being placed in the ground so they're not interrupted by derechos, they're not interrupted by weather events, and they're also future-proof by meaning that as the need grows by putting in these types of networks, then we can easily upgrade those networks to meet the needs of Iowans. And that means not just the end user, but that also means the cell phone companies, the fixed wireless companies that are out in the field. It's fiber networks that actually feed those services. So it's more than just hitting that end user.
Hey, Chuck, can I just add to that? Christina here. So I'm actually on the Information Technology Committee, and partly because I care so much about broadband. And my understanding from the chair of that committee, what he said is that the funding, the actual dollar amount that will be used for this is going to be handled by appropriations, not by our committee. So we won't be in charge of sort of determining. I wish we were, but we're not. And so that dollar amount is going to go through appropriations. But the Information Technology Committee, I do think, could play a role in specifying some of these requirements, right? And kind of coming up with non-monetary regulations on kind of what our targets are, what we're going to look at and we'll try to do. So do you know whether, you mentioned that the group that's involved with this is recommending 100 by 100. Is that, have they actually introduced a bill on that? Do you know whether there's anything that, because I have not seen anything in Information Technology Committee so far. That committee is getting off to a much slower start than say Judiciary for sure, where it's, all things all the time. But do you know whether anything has been brought to that committee in writing, a proposal? Because I'd be happy to do something, but I don't, if something's already being done, then I can just sort of look at that.
Christina, it's Mary Masher. Just to let folks know, the funding for the infrastructure capitals, that's our budget. And so whenever there's technology issues, those usually come through the infrastructure capitals and transportation budget sub. And so we should be seeing the governor's recommendations. Obviously, we have her budget. And so we know what she's allocated. Whether the legislature and the House and the Senate, the majority party, decides to fund it at that level is what we will decide within those committees. So it's already a part of our responsibilities in that infrastructure, capitals, transportation budget sub.
Okay, that's your budget sub. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the sub. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't know which sub it was going to be in. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
the
and
sub
it's
it
my
usually goes
understanding
through.
that, oop, go ahead, Mary, I'm sorry.
Just that's the sub it usually goes through, just to let you know.
Okay.
And it's
Good to
my
know.
understanding the governor was able to build her recommendation based on input from the rural, I forget what that
Power
is.
Rural Iowa.
There you go.
She's
And,
got a lot of different committees
Yeah, and
with the word rural in them.
so you're starting off early here, Joe. We're only 12 minutes into it already here. So, but
I'm just getting
yeah.
warmed
So
up.
that's where her recommendation was coming from, was from that group. Now there has been, I've heard some discussions that CenturyLink has said for them to upgrade to those types of numbers, or even to get to 25x3, just for their customers might be $1 billion. There's some other estimates that's probably too high. It's very expensive. We all know that, but again, it's investing in the future. And if you look back some years and trying to band-aid some of this stuff, it's not going to work. And that's the situation we're in now. The areas that have access to broadband, robust broadband connections, are the ones that have invested for the future. And where they haven't taken those dollars, those customers, those Iowa constituents are really hurting. I know it from a day-to-day basis. I talked to 2 customers this morning in rural areas and want to know if this is going to be able to be used, these grant dollars be used for build out to them. And right now, because the way the maps are being done by the state, they're not eligible, and they really have nothing out in their area. They should be a poster child for getting access to grant funds, but based on the mapping that is incorrect by some of the larger carriers, their companies like ours are blocked of getting access to those funds. So those things need to be addressed as well. And then you get into the urban areas, and Jennifer knows, she's been working feverishly with different groups about getting access for students, and finding out right in Iowa City, there's pockets that they show they're served, but those customers don't have access to them, to any type of broadband. So it's a real challenge.
Yeah, I think everybody thinks that we should have high-speed internet to everybody all the time. And when I think about that, we've had kind of a piecemeal approach, like most states. I mean, we try and pull some pots of money together and hand them out and hope and pray we get some more people with high-speed internet. When we electrified the country, we had a pretty significant federal effort to do that. And that's what we need. That's the scale of what we need now, it seems to me. When we talk about this $450 million, it seems frequently it's framed about how we can get more broadband coverage to rural Iowa. And as Chuck, as you just noted, we have people in Iowa City and Coralville and North Liberty that don't have high-speed internet. And for either they don't have the technology in the line, or they don't have the money to afford it, right? So when we talk about this, I hope that we can have a broad conversation. It's just not giving grant money to people that one, we need more federal help. And two, it's all well and good to take money from taxpayers in Des Moines and Iowa City to support broadband in other parts of the state. But when we're doing it in a way that they don't get any benefit from the investment, so I'm not sure how to have that conversation. We just came through a political campaign where we were called socialists, and we're gonna basically take all this money and hand it off to solve a problem we all agree is a problem. So I think we need to have some accountability around that, and have a broader conversation about making sure the benefits of this investment are widely shared. I've actually heard that the funding for this is some scheme through the Iowa Finance Authority that the governor has, and I'm not sure what the payback mechanism is, but We all want internet. We all want high-speed internet, and I think we need to make sure it gets to everybody, including people in urban Iowa.
Yeah, I would just echo some of that. Obviously there are a couple of different pieces here. Chuck, I know that you and I have spoken about the challenges that your industry is facing. Part of it's obviously the funding on the last mile in some of these more rural and far-flung parts of our state. Part of it is the supply chain and the fact that across the world, the United States is not the only place that's developing a new found appreciation for high-speed internet. And then also, I think that you've talked about workforce and how there are some challenges for especially some of the smaller companies to find the necessary workers to be a part of this. And all those things cost money. And that was exactly why it was so frustrating to hear in the very same speech the governor's calling for a $450 million investment in broadband, that she's also talking about removing the triggers on the 2018 tax bill, that it's going to create a lot more difficulty for the state to pay for these kinds of investments in the future. And so I think there are two pieces to it. One is making sure that we get the funding right. And we'll look forward to seeing whatever the governor brings forward. And then the other piece is the policy side, and that's where we're going to depend on industry experts like you to help make sure that we're setting the right goals and we're not just putting ourselves in a position where, as Dave said a couple of minutes ago, that we're making a big investment only for it to not be worth much in a couple of years. But I mean, I think that's part of as Joe was saying a minute ago, part of this bigger picture concern that I think a lot of us have, which is, you hear the governor say one thing when it comes to making these kinds of important investments in our state, and then literally just minutes later talk about choking off like 1.6 billion in revenue over the next several years. So got to get all the pieces right.
Well, with
Joe,
that,
and Joe, I think you're spot on with spending dollars wisely. You're right. I mean, if it's not done right, we're going to be right back in this again. So it's a lot of money. It needs to be spent wisely. It's very complex. There's a lot of moving parts. But the challenge is the need is yesterday, and it'll take years to develop this. Whether whether it's wireless or not, it's going to be years. If we go down the path of wireless, it could get out a little sooner, but then it won't be there in 3 years when you need the upgrades. It'll be capped. So that's going to be the real challenge. But I couldn't agree with you more on spending the dollars wisely. Yeah, absolutely. And the federal side, there is some help on the federal side. It's going to be extremely slow. The grant that we received last October to build rural Oxford we probably won't be able to get access to starting construction till 2022, just because of USDA is so backed up. So, and then contractors, Zach mentioned, workforce and access to contractors, supply chain, another issue. Many companies are finding that contractors are already booked out through 2021. We luckily secured materials and a contractor last summer when we anticipated some of these issues because of the pandemic, and we're fortunate that we're still going to be able to get some of our jobs completed because of that. Other companies aren't so fortunate.
well, so I wanted to kind of get to something else that Zach mentioned, which was the triggers and the tax triggers that the governor mentioned in her address. And being the nerd that I am, I had to go in and read what are those triggers, how much money are we talking about, and all of that. So I'm just going to do kind of a quick level set for those of you who are curious. The triggers are a pair of revenue goals included in the 2018 law that makes sure that the state budget is healthy. The goals are Iowa's general fund revenue must equal or exceed $8.314 billion, and state revenue must grow by at least 4% from the previous fiscal year. So I saw that the governor's staff said that they were on target to grow that 4%, but because of the pandemic, that didn't quite happen. They're thinking that next year they'll meet the triggers. I get nervous because I hear, like you mentioned, Zach, I hear, mental health, I hear broadband, I hear childcare, I hear education funding. There's a lot of things on our bucket list that we want to fund. So removing the triggers, I just wanted to try to understand that a little bit better. I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to talk about here is really simplifying the corporate tax code, trying to be more competitive in that market. And I know that that's probably something that our members are really interested in too. Are there ways for us to sort of streamline our tax code, and have a broader conversation about that, rather than sort of this piecemeal approach of, kind of the way I've seen her present some ideas in the last couple of years? Joe, do you have thoughts on that?
Thanks, Jennifer. A couple things. First, the 2018 tax cut that is currently on the books is going to go into effect probably in the next 2 years without any legislative action. The state budget's going to get to 8.3 billion. It's just a matter of time. It's not going to be this year. It's probably going to be next. And we are going to have 4% revenue growth because 14 out of the last 20 years, we've had 4% revenue growth. So the legislature, it doesn't actually need to do anything for this second tax cut that was passed in 2018 to go ahead. Now, the good news is the 2018 tax cut actually provides a decent benefit to middle class working people, right? So we're going to give a tax cut for a change in Iowa, not just to rich people. The first part of the tax cut in 2018, half of it went to like 3% of taxpayers. So that if you like tax cuts and you want to make sure they go to middle class people and working people, because of what we do with lowering the rates and coupling with federal tax treatment of income, it actually wouldn't be a bad tax cut, right? But the impact of that tax cut is lost state revenue, and within 5 years, with the general fund revenue goes down by nearly $500 million in like the fourth year. So if you want to fund schools or mental health, or it makes it more difficult to do that. The challenge, I think, looking out a few years, in 2026, the federal tax changes that were passed under President Bush all go away. And I think one of the questions to the state tax code is because we automatically took on any federal change, there could be impacts from federal changes that impact Iowa's revenue one way or the other. And so that's a concern. So in terms of your question about making the code better for average taxpayers, probably when these go into effect, it will be simpler. We get rid of this thing called federal deductibility, as Dave knows, which has been on our books. We're one of like 3 states with this kind of arcane tax treatment of federal taxes being able to be deducted on your state taxes. That goes away, which I think is good for the business community. We had a top rate of like 9%, almost 9%. Now the top rate is 6.5%. So that's good for businesses looking to come here. The executives look at, well, what's the top tax rate? We fixed that problem, which has been a problem for as long as all of us have been in the legislature. So that's good. On the corporate tax side, I mean, if you want to do more to lower the rates for everybody, you have to go in and take the decorations, these very fancy decorations off the Christmas tree, that give benefits just to some companies that aren't available to all companies. And there's a couple credits in particular. The research activity credit is probably the gold standard of tax credits in the country. And it's going to go up to about $80 million this year, which is a lot. So there's things that can be done to continue to have a good research activity credit, but we could save some money by paring it back some. Would be one example of a way to lower the rates for everybody by taking the money we give to that and give it to other people.
Thank you, Dave. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I've often said in terms of the corporate income tax, I think we can simplify and we can lower it. You could even get to the 7% range if everyone pays it. It's a little bit what Joe is alluding to, is that we have some companies paying it and some not. It seems like the 7% was one that John Deere, if I understood her correctly, said we would, if we'll pay the 7% corporate income tax and do away with the big check. Joe, what is it, 24 million, whatever the check is that we write to John Deere, not John Deere to the state, but vice versa. So and the tax bill with the income and the revenue estimating conference, I'm just a little nervous, because the reason our revenues are looking at 4% increase is the huge influx of federal dollars that came to Iowa in 2020. So billions of dollars came to Iowa in terms of help bolster ag, help bolster some of our small businesses, not all, and also help a lot of citizens with the emergency unemployment insurance. So that's it. We're in a little tenuous position to see what the revenue estimating conference will look like throughout 2021. And a lot of it hinges, as we all know, on the vaccine rollout. And the vaccine rollout has been just completely botched. It's sad that my neighbors hopped in a car, drove to Florida, got their vaccination within 24 hours, and then drove back. Is that right? For some of us that hypothetically aren't 65 yet, but will be soon, where does that put us? But even more important, we have people that don't even know how to get on a wait list, don't know where they are in the tier of things. Wednesday cleared it up a little bit, but not near where we should be. And I think that's where, when we talk about Iowans rolling up their sleeves, it usually means to go to work. Now we're rolling up our sleeves hoping to get a shot.
Well, thank you for that. Is there anybody else want to jump in for that question about tax code? I know that's like everybody's least favorite conversation. So, okay, so I will move on to, one of the most, the top level tax recipient here, which is education. So I wanted to talk to you all about education related bills. The governor proposed, obviously 100% in-person classes in her speech, and now there's a bill about that. We've got bills about education, about vouchers. And I just wanted to kind of get your feedback too, especially from Mary. I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. When we talk about funding for education and going back 100%, what are your thoughts around keeping our teachers safe, keeping our students safe, and funding the additional costs that are related to that?
So the good news is that the 1B category of folks includes teachers, and that group is supposed to have started, some of them have already started getting vaccines in certain counties, and we've been told that statewide everyone should be a part of that group beginning on February 1st. But at the same time, it's a large group. It includes everybody over 65. So Dave, when's your birthday? Just checking. But anyway, once that happens, I always have said, if you want kids back in school, vaccinate teachers and staff. And that's kind of been our mantra from day one. And that's what our administrators have been saying as well. Teachers and staff, the problem has always been not that kids are getting sick and having that passing from one to another, but we also know that once teachers are sick, then you can't find the subs. And that's been the biggest problem. And we've lowered the standard for who can sub now. So anybody with a bachelor's degree in anything can sub, but I'm not sure the quality is there. When you're looking at that, are we just looking at people who aren't necessarily people who have an expertise in those areas? And so that becomes an enormous problem as well. So I am hoping we are planning on amending the bill that teachers and everybody go back, that kids go back 100% to basically say, yes, as soon as they're able to get vaccinated. So again, there are some protections built into that. Will they accept that? Probably not. Obviously, they can't even accept people wearing masks at the Capitol. So why would they ever expect anybody to be safe in schools and not be vaccinated? But at the same time, that's what I wanted to share. And I know the Senate, they're dealing with some pretty atrocious bills as well. And I'm sure they'll be coming our way in the House. We have our own set of pretty awful legislation coming through, lowering standards for non-registered childcare providers so that they can accept more children into their programs. And again, nobody inspects those programs. We have no assurances that the quality is there and that those kids are in safe settings. Because again, if you're unregistered, there's no requirements at all in terms of, other than if they're over a certain number, then they have to be registered. But unfortunately, we have lots. They think half the child care workforce is below that number 6 in terms of if you have more than that, you have to be a registered provider. But if we start increasing the numbers of kids that those people can take care of, that's an enormous problem. And again, it gets back to quality and making sure kids are in safe settings.
Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, but this whole issue is incredibly frustrating. The fact is that they're pushing this plan forward without any consideration of forthcoming federal guidance from President Biden and his team, without any consideration for the fact that new strains are emerging that are more contagious than the current strains, and that we have made it to this point, and they want to just, I mean, this is basically like driving to the 5-yard line and then punting is what they're doing, right? I mean, we are literally beginning the process of vaccinating the people who are in these buildings. We have paid it like a very steep price to get to this point, and now we're just gonna kind of hand wave it away. And then finally, it also is going to be hugely disruptive to the folks who are currently in a hybrid plan. If you are in a hybrid plan, this is going to just throw that out the window. And so, yeah, I mean, we're dealing with it in the Senate. Republicans have made very clear they are going to move this bill and get it down to the governor for her signature stat. We have an education forum in about 56 minutes, so I'm sure that we're going to be getting an earful there as well. But
well, and I
not
sat
great.
in on the Grantwood
Christina,
AEA.
I would, for people who don't like sports metaphors, I would say this is like filling out 95% of the questions on the 100 question multiple choice test and then throwing the test away. That's what's happening here.
It was a clumsy, man. It was a clumsy. I'm trying to think about punting.
That
from
one
the
I get.
5.
Well, no, but Jude, the fact that they're punting from the 5 is precisely why it's so ridiculous. I mean, they have gotten so close to getting to the spot where everyone who's responsible for getting these kids educated has been vaccinated, and then just in a completely nonsensical move, we're just throwing this all away. It's really sad.
Well, and
Yes,
I want to kind of get back to, and I'm sure you're going to hear this at your next forum as well, but I sat in on a Grantwood AEA meeting earlier this week. And so the 32 school districts that make up the Grantwood AEA, which is our region, gain between 200 and 450 students per year. This year, our school districts lost a combined 1,100 students collectively. And I just want to, when we talk about school funding, I also like to always remind people that we rank 30th in the nation in expenditures per student. So we spend about almost $12,000 per student per year. Is that correct, Mary? Yes, no? No, okay.
I think it's about 7,000 per year.
Okay, 7,000. Yep, and so we are far below the national average on that. So, three suggestions have come up over the last few months. One is a higher supplemental state aid amount. the ability for districts to use last year's enrollment if that's higher, and a one-time appropriation to schools to help offset the lost revenue. And I think I've heard the argument here recently, well, schools don't have students back in class, so they're not spending as much because the kids aren't in the school building. But from what I'm hearing from our school districts, they have huge expenditures this past year from technology, from getting things online, from additional PPE, issues around busing. There's just so much more that they're spending their money on this year. So it's not like they saved a whole bunch of money this year because kids weren't in the school building. We, as a business partnership, advocate for educational issues because this is our future workforce. So what are you guys hearing? What are your main concerns around education funding for next year? And, what's on your radar?
So the governor proposed 2.5% supplemental state aid increase in her budget, but we've been told by our districts that it's going to take at least 4.5% in order for them to be able to accommodate the 6,000 children who did not enroll statewide this year that will be back in our schools next year. And so that is a definite, it's an enormous problem. That's to the tune of $42 million statewide. I think in our district, it's about 300 students is what we've seen in terms of a drop, when in the past we've always seen an increase. And so obviously it's going to have an impact here. In terms of what they will actually fund, usually the governor's proposal is the top of the bar, and then we have the House and the Senate that go below the bar, and we end up someplace in the middle. So if this is what we're looking at, it'll be totally inadequate, especially if we're dealing with vouchers and public charter schools or private charter schools, which has destroyed a lot of education in other states. So I'll stop there and let others chime in.
Can I just add to that? Mary knows a lot more about this than I do. She's on education. But I will say, just to add to that last point about the vouchers, not only is that potentially pulling more students out of the public schools, right? Giving them an incentive to go elsewhere at a time when we're trying to get our kids back in public schools after the pandemic. But the other thing is that, and I just sort of had asked somebody for some of these numbers, the $3 million that's being put in that educational savings account for the voucher system that's being proposed. Apparently, if you look at the number of kids who are eligible for that, it's about 10,000 and change. And so the amount of funding that would be going to those kids per student is way higher than actually what it is for our public schools, for what's being proposed, for the money that's being proposed. That's so far. Now that's preliminary. That's something that I had just asked for, and but that's what they're saying. And so I think that's pretty disturbing.
Yeah, the on the private school vouchers, the summary that we've seen, actually there's not a cap on it. She puts a cap on it, the governor, at 3 million, but it's estimated at about just more than $50 million. And it's kind of an entitlement that if your kids sign up for it, they just get it. So there's not like a budget on it. You could have a budget and say you're not going to spend more than this, but that isn't how the Senate bill reads at this point. It would essentially give a family $5,200 for their child to basically use on their educational expenses as they saw fit. There's no accounting for the money. They either get a check or some sort of credit card to go out and spend. And who knows if they're spending what they're exactly spending the money on. They can spend it on pretty much anything they want because there's no follow-up with it. They can also, one of the expenses that's allowed is for higher ed. I mean, you could have somebody pull their kid out, get this money, and smart parents might start saving for college with money that should go to a kid's high school education. So there are a lot of problems with it. If we don't have $50-some million to take out of our public schools, so it's going to be a challenge, and it's probably going to impact big districts like ours, like Des Moines, like Cedar Rapids, where kids might want to have their parents, a lot of concern about white flight. occurring under this plan, and I guess we're going to see where it's going to go. They seem pretty set on passing it.
Yeah, the one thing that I would add to that, the Republicans have been trying for several years to get rid of diversity plans. More recently, until recently, were called desegregation plans. And so that is, again, something that's going to be here. And it's really frustrating because last year, Democrats and Republicans were able to work together in a really bipartisan way to address some of the disparities that we see in our criminal justice system and how those things affect racial inequities in our society. And now for them to kind of take a step in literally the exact opposite direction is just really disappointing.
Well, thank you for that. I want to just remind our members, if you have questions, please send them to me. Okay. Stephanie, do you want to ask this one yourself, or do you want me to do it? Okay.
It was just a comment, sorry, that
Okay,
there
go
is
ahead.
a new property tax bill that's also out that would eliminate anyone over the age of 65 having to pay property tax, which could impact or school funding. I hope they put a fiscal note out on that so we can see what that impact would be by school district.
Yeah.
Or community college.
Yeah, and I would think that that might impact some of our rural communities very negatively too.
Mhm.
So I saw that and I was very curious about it. So
Well, wait a minute. What age was that again?
It's 65.
Okay.
this is working in your favor.
Let me think
You're-
about that. But, I had one, and from what I've heard from a lot of people who reach a retirement age, is not so much property tax free, but that they were struggling after retirement on fixed income to pay the increases in their property tax valuation. So I think a better discussion is, no one is property tax free. You live in a house. Is there anything we can do to ease the pain of those valuation increases that tend to happen a lot in Johnson County and in Lynn County too? So that's a discussion I think we need to have. Going to zero would be rather tough and immensely tough for the rural areas where, just looking at where my mother-in-law is from up in Rockwell City, that would be 2/3 of the tax base, maybe 7/8. I'm sure they have someone under 25. I just never see them. That's a good one of the things that we've learned from the pandemic is how valuable our public schools are. So it's kind of weird to me that the public schools are now who we're going after. We're saying you are so valuable, you have to be at 100%, everyone back. But on the same point, we're not going to fund you at the level you need to be 100%.
One of the other issues the governor brought up in her State of the State address had to do with open enrollment. Currently with open enrollment, it has to be a contiguous district, a district that's right beside yours. This would open it up to anybody in the state. And again, that goes back to the white flight issue that we've talked about before in terms of who gets to do that. It would have transportation and mobility. Inner city kids and kids who are in poverty don't have the ability to drive to a neighboring district and do that. So again, it creates more inequity at a time when we're trying to address the inequity in our school systems, in our minority achievement gaps, all of that right now. So to me, again, that's a backwards approach to trying to help all students achieve. So there you go.
Well, and on that note, Christina, I have been thinking about you a lot this week with the bill that was presented on tenure. Kind of another, Mary, you were just talking about how important our schools are. Our universities are equally important in training our future generation. Is this just one of those bills that they're kind of lobbing over the wall to say, we're mad at you and it's not going to go anywhere, or is this going to go somewhere?
Well, others can speak to this too. I certainly hope it doesn't. My understanding is that the Senate one is not advancing. Isn't that right, Zach? I think that's what I heard, that the Senate one is not advancing on the anti-tenure. So I'm hopeful that Senate over there, guys, please stop this thing from happening. There are, though, other bills that are being introduced that are pretty crazy. I think, Mary, did you write about this in the Gazette or something recently about the research funding expenditures or something like, I think that was, it's crazy. I mean, the legislature should not have the purview to do this. I mean, I'm still thinking about the state federal part of this. Like, does the state legislature really tell us what to do with federal funds? The proposal literally just makes no sense. I mean, the legislature wouldn't even have time to approve all of these things. I mean, it's really kind of crazy. And so, the sense that we're getting is, I mean, there's even a bill I heard the other day that would require the law school faculties at both Drake and University of Iowa to all be members of the bar. Just really because they're mad at someone who advocated for something, and there's always kind of this angle to it, and I think I just think it's really sad, honestly, that there's this hostility toward the universities. We are not perfect. The universities are not perfect. We're very large organizations. We don't always get everything right. I know that there's been some frustration over freedom of speech issues, and I know that's a priority for the business partnership. So, that's something that I've taught a lot about at the university. I've talked about, I do think that we need to have free speech, and we should not punish anyone, students or faculty or anyone, for expressing opinions, whether they're conservative, whether they're liberal, on any side. I mean, I think everybody on this call would agree with that. And we don't always get that right. I mean, administrators at the university, they're in tough spots sometimes when incidents come up, and they don't always know how to handle it in the moment. They're trying to do everything right, and they don't always handle it. Sometimes they get it wrong. And we've seen that happen. But on the other hand, having the legislature try to propose all of these bills, which, by the way, have no nexus or connection whatsoever to the freedom of speech thing or anything else. I mean, they're just being thrown out there kind of punitively, really does not make any sense. And they're cutting off the nose to spite their face, as my parents used to say. I mean, because these are our universities. We need to take pride in them. We need to invest in them. They really benefit the state. And and so, I mean, I can talk about this all day, but I just think that, I think that we need to understand that universities are big, complex organizations. They're not always going to get everything right, and when they don't, we talk about it and we fix it. But these sort of punitive proposals just hurt everybody, and I think it's really unfortunate.
So I would be surprised if this bill moved forward all the way to the Senate floor. It did move out of subcommittee last year, but did not come to the Education Committee. I'm not on the Education Committee this year, so I haven't been tracking it quite as closely, although obviously I did see that it was filed. Senator Zahn, I think, is mostly trying to make a point here, but there is obviously a lot of animosity towards institutions of higher education in the state by the Republican Party, and there's just an increasingly hostile climate that their party is putting forward towards college education and towards higher education generally. So I would not expect this to move forward today, but as Christina just said, I do think that we will be seeing some legislation that will probably have what most people in this call would perceive to be an adverse effect on higher education at some point this year.
And that's why I also think now it's going to be critical who we get for a University of Iowa president. I'm not saying that the last 4 or 5 years that hire was a mistake, but to be honest with you, we need someone like Drake University's president, Marty Martin. This guy is tough. He doesn't take any crap. He came out after what happened on January 6th. He knows the First Amendment. He knows the Second Amendment. He's a retired colonel. He's the kind of person that we need at the helm of the University of Iowa.
Sounds like we need to put you on the hiring committee. Maybe Christina can help with that.
Tell them to apply.
Yeah. I'm just excited-
I don't
I'm
actually
just
recommend it to
excited that we
anybody,
have-
so.
I'm
I was
For the
gonna
experience
say-
I've had.
He's probably seen how our regents, regent universities do. So, okay,
I'm
with
just
that,
excited, Jennifer, that we've got good applicants. It sounds like there's
Oh,
been
good.
a lot of interest. And to
Okay.
me, that is helpful. I was worried that people are going to say, stay away, don't go there. It's not a good place to be right now. Look at what the legislature is doing. And to me, that's more of a sign of that we got good applicants. And our search firm has said there's a great deal of interest and some real quality. And again, I think that bodes well for all of us.
good, excellent. All right, Chuck, I'm going to pass it back off to you. We have about 8 minutes left. Any last thoughts, questions from anyone?
Any of our legislators have any final comments they would like to make sure that is brought forward on this call?
I do. I have a subcommittee next Monday on E-Verify that I will be on again. E-Verify, to me, just looking up the Cato Institute is talking about how flawed E-Verify is and how inaccurate it is. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking about is the way you can get around E-Verify and some of the things that we need to possibly do to address this. I'm not against holding employers responsible, but I want a system that is accurate. It's running at about 54% accuracy. So is there anybody out here that has any ideas or anything I can use?
Not
All
hearing a
right.
whole lot there, Kevin.
I know that this is not the first time and probably not the last time we're going to hear from E-Verify, but I think that I will go back into my notes from last year, or was it 2 years ago? I can't remember now when E-Verify came up.
In the last 3 years.
Yeah. So I do have some notes about some of our area employers that were especially impacted by that. And I think that our construction crews, Dennis, I think construction was really impacted by it. That was one of the industries that popped into my mind from last time. So I'll reconnect with you on that, Kevin, and I'll see if, can they join your subcommittee meeting through Zoom?
Yes,
And
I
ask-
can.
Okay.
On the Senate side, you can join
Okay.
by Zoom and participate.
Yes. Okay. So I'll kind of dig in and see if that's a possibility for Monday.
Okay.
Can I say one last thing? So one thing is just to Chuck, Chuck, if you know of anything beyond, we've already talked about to help with the broadband issue besides just the appropriations thing, I would be happy to bring it to the Information Technology Committee. So let me know anything you think of. But the other thing I just want to say is, I don't know how much all of you have been paying attention to this, and I know that this isn't exactly a business issue per se, but I think it matters. So the House has been really pushing through the anti-abortion amendment and the strict scrutiny gun amendment at lightning speed. We had the subcommittee early in the second week of session, and the abortion amendment passed through Judiciary Committee the very next day, and then the strict scrutiny amendment passed the day after that. And so now it has been.
Oh no.
She is not on a South Slope connection.
Oh, sorry. Did I freeze up or something?
There we go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how long you, sorry. See, we need this. This is a problem. This comes out of personal frustration, Chuck. I get it.
I can tell you where to
anyway.
move and you won't have that problem, but you probably won't
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah, I'll have to move to a very rural area after all this happens in the rural areas. But these amendments, these anti-abortion constitutional amendments, the gun amendment, which is a very extreme version of a gun amendment, is not just the Second Amendment, it's an extreme version of that. And the abortion amendment completely does away with the fundamental right to abortion in the Iowa Constitution. Both of those things have been moved through committee at lightning speed. They are on the calendar for this week. I think the earliest they can go is Wednesday is what I'm hearing, because they were just put on the calendar for Monday. But these are huge. And I know, we've seen in other states when this kind of social legislation has passed, there is a problem for businesses. We've seen in Arizona with some of the immigration stuff. There's been a backlash, and I think it's hard sometimes to recruit people to come to Iowa to live here, to work here, when this kind of legislation is passing. It sends a signal about Iowa that a lot of people don't find appealing. And so I don't know if this is something that any of your members listening want to get into, but it's happening this week. It's happening very, very quickly. There's been very little opportunity for public input because we didn't allow people to speak during the subcommittees, and people are scared to come to the Capitol because of the COVID problem. And so it's just moving through with very little public sort of attention. We are getting some comments. We're getting comments, but it's just moving through really quickly, and it's pretty scary. So if any of you are interested in that, please do send emails. And honestly, at this point, I would send an email to every single representative in the House, because that's where we are. We're on the floor now. So.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that forward. Appreciate that. I know we're running up close to the end of our discussion today. Definitely want to thank the legislators. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service, and please stay healthy. We need you down there. And want to thank our members for the great questions and participating as well. We look forward to seeing you again here soon, and I'll turn this back over to Jennifer for closing comments.
Well, and yeah, I just wanted to echo, thank you so much. Really appreciate all of your work. I've been watching you on the floor debates and the subcommittees and trying to check in and send good thoughts your way. So I wanted to maybe give you a little bit more bad news, but we are going to cancel our annual day at the Capitol. I know everybody always looks forward to kolaches and burritos, but we just couldn't figure out how to do that safely this year. So you will be getting, we're still working out details, but you might be getting a kolache in the form of a magnet. Save the date for 2022. So the kolaches and the burritos will return next year. So something to look forward to in the future. But
we can't eat a magnet, Jennifer. Come on.
I was gonna remind Dave not to eat the magnet.
I know. Yeah.
You got a magnetic personality as it is, Dave. You don't need anything more.
Well, and we're kind of going through the ethics to see if we can give you all a burrito gift card. So we're working through that right now. So I don't want to promise anything, but our next legislative forum is on February 26th. I know a lot is going to happen between now and then. So I know you guys are always really great about answering my phone calls and answering my emails. So I appreciate that time. If something comes up that you'd like our feedback on, or like to Kevin's point, if you'd like our help on something, please let us know in reverse. So again, just want to thank our sponsors, IBW 405, Green State Credit Union, and South Slope for supporting this program today. And I hope you all take care and you're well and healthy. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.